The grand chamber of Nexus 7 space station hummed with tension. Representatives from 27 galactic species sat around the massive circular table, their different body shapes accommodated by specially designed seats. At the head of the table, High Counselor Vex, a tall, blue-skinned being with 4 arms, stood to address the gathering. The Peace Summit will begin in 3 standard cycles, Vex announced, voice amplified through translation devices. For security reasons, the Council has voted to enforce a complete weapons ban during the proceedings. All delegations must comply. Ambassador Tom Harris, the lead human representative, listened carefully. Unlike the other aliens with their striking colors and unusual anatomies, he looked plain in his formal blue suit. But there was a quiet confidence in his posture that some found unsettling. This ban includes all energy weapons, ballistic devices, blade implements, and any other tools designed primarily for combat. Vex continued. Our security systems will scan all delegates upon entry to conference areas. Harris noticed several delegates from the Drax Empire exchange meaningful glances. The Drax, reptilian beings with thick, scaled skin and powerful jaws, had a reputation for aggression. Their lead diplomat, Lord Krull, stared directly at Harris with cold yellow eyes. When the meeting ended, Harris walked back to the human quarters alongside his security chief, Lisa Gray. She moved with the easy grace of someone completely aware of her surroundings. They think we're weak now, Gray said quietly. The Drax are practically celebrating. Harris nodded. They believe humans rely on our technology. Take away our guns and ships, and what's left? They've never visited Earth, have they? Gray replied with a small smile. No, Harris said. They don't understand what it means to evolve on a death world. Back in their quarters, Harris gathered the small human delegation. Besides Gray, there was Jack Turner, a diplomatic specialist with keen eyes that missed nothing. Dr. Ben Miller, a scientist whose knowledge of alien biology had proven invaluable, and 5 other support staff members. The weapons ban changes things, Harris explained. The Drax will see it as an advantage. They believe we're soft creatures who depend on our tools. Their mistake, Miller said, pushing his glasses up. Human beings survived on Earth long before we invented guns. We're persistence hunters. We have incredible endurance, problem-solving skills, and adaptability. Turner checked his datapad. Intelligence suggests the Drax are planning something. They've brought twice the normal number of diplomatic aides to this summit. Harris looked at each member of his team. We can't bring weapons, but remember, humans didn't conquer Earth because we had claws or armor. We did it with these. He tapped his temple. Our minds, our ability to turn anything into a tool, our determination. Gray stood up and stretched her shoulders. I've seen a human with nothing but a pen defeat an armed attacker. We're never truly disarmed. Exactly, Harris said, his voice firm. The Galactic Council doesn't understand what humans really are. They think they're taking our weapons away, but they don't realize that we are the weapons. As the team dispersed to prepare for the summit, Harris looked out the viewport at the stars. Earth was just one tiny dot among millions, but its children carried something unique in this vast galaxy, the legacy of a species that had overcome everything a harsh planet could throw at them. And now, surrounded by aliens who thought them defenseless, the humans would show exactly why that was a dangerous assumption to make. The shuttle docked at Nexus 7's main bay with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Through the viewport, Ambassador Harris watched as station security, a mix of robotic drones and various alien species in matching blue uniforms, lined up to greet them. Showtime, Harris muttered to his team. Remember, we're here for peace. The human delegation stepped out into the vast docking bay. Compared to the other species arriving at nearby platforms, some with tentacles, others hovering above the ground, a few standing 3 times human height, they looked remarkably plain. Officer Krell, the station's head of security, approached them. He belonged to the Vorn species, a race of amphibious beings with slick green skin and large, unblinking eyes set wide apart on a flat face. "Welcome to Nexus 7, Krell said through his translator. "All delegates must submit to security scanning before proceeding." Lisa Gray stepped forward first, standing with arms outstretched in the scanning arch. Blue light washed over her body as hidden sensors searched for weapons. The scanner beeped green. "Clear," announced a mechanical voice. One by one, the humans passed through without incident. Harris noted the slight surprise in Krell's expression. "Your species has a reputation for being prepared," Krell said, studying Harris carefully. "I expected at least some discussion about hidden tools or diplomatic exceptions." Harris smiled politely. "The Terran Alliance respects the Council's rules. We're here to build trust, not challenge regulations." As they moved through the station's central promenade, a magnificent open space with gardens, water features, and hundreds of beings from across the galaxy, Gray nudged Harris and nodded toward a shadowy corner. Two Drax observers tracked their movement, making no attempt to hide their surveillance. The bigger one, with distinctive red markings on his scales, whispered something to his companion while staring directly at the humans. "We have an audience," Gray whispered. Harris nodded. "Expected. The Drax have been pushing into our border systems for months. This summit is their chance to size us up." Jack Turner fell into step beside them, seeming to admire the architecture while actually scanning for potential threats. Three more Drax by the fountain. Two near the elevator. They positioned themselves at all exit points. "Smart," Gray said, "but predictable." Their assigned quarters were located in the diplomatic wing, a series of suites arranged in a circle around a common area. As they entered their rooms, Dr. Miller immediately began checking for surveillance devices. "Clear," he announced after a thorough sweep. "But I wouldn't say anything sensitive without precautions." Harris called the team together. "First impressions." "The Drax are too confident," Gray said. "They watched us come in unarmed and think we're vulnerable. I counted at least 15 of their operatives disguised as staff or diplomats." Turner pulled up the summit schedule on a holographic display. "We have the welcoming reception tonight. All species, all delegates. Perfect opportunity for them to test us. Or provoke us," Miller added. "The Drax value physical dominance. They may try to intimidate us publicly, establish a hierarchy." Harris looked thoughtful. "Then let's disappoint them. No reactions, no matter what they do. We stay calm, professional." A soft knock interrupted him. Gray moved silently to the door, checking the security feed. "It's Officer Krell," she said. Harris nodded for her to open it. The security chief stood in the doorway, his wide eyes unreadable. "Ambassador Harris," Krell said, "the High Counselor requests your presence. Alone." Harris exchanged quick glances with his team. This wasn't on the schedule. "Of course," he replied smoothly. "Lead the way." As Harris followed Krell down the corridor, he felt the weight of unseen eyes. The game had begun, and the first move wasn't theirs. The reception hall gleamed with polished stone and floating light orbs that changed colors every few minutes. Delegates from across the galaxy mingled, their diverse forms creating a living tapestry of the known universe. The air smelled of exotic foods and strange perfumes that the human delegation's translators identified but couldn't properly describe. Harris returned from his meeting with the High Counselor looking thoughtful. He pulled Gray and Turner aside near a display of ancient peace treaties. "The Council is nervous," he said quietly. "There have been threats against several delegations. They're increasing security, but they wanted to warn us specifically." "Because we're unarmed?" Turner asked. "Because we're new," Harris corrected. "Most species here have centuries of diplomatic relations. We're the unknown factor." Gray's eyes narrowed as she scanned the room. Speaking of unknown factors, a group of Drax had entered the hall. Their leader, Lord Krull, towered over most delegates at nearly 7 feet tall. His scales gleamed like polished metal under the lights, and ornate markings covered his neck and face, signs of high military rank in Drax culture. Ambassador Harris, Krull called out, his translator making his gravelly voice sound almost musical. I hoped to meet Earth's representatives. Harris stepped forward with a practiced smile. Lord Krull, an honor. May I introduce my security chief, Lisa Gray. Krull's yellow eyes fixed on Gray. She was tall for a human woman, athletic and composed, but still much smaller than the massive Drax. Security. Krull laughed, the sound like stones grinding together. Without weapons, what protection can you offer? The nearby conversations quieted as other delegates turned to watch. Harris felt the tension rising, but maintained his diplomatic smile. We manage, Gray replied calmly. One of Krull's aides, a younger Drax with bright green markings, stepped forward. Perhaps a demonstration, a friendly contest between security personnel. Harris started to decline, but Gray touched his arm. It's fine, Ambassador. The delegates formed a circle in the center of the hall. The Drax aide, who introduced himself as Commander Vex, stood opposite Gray. He was at least twice her weight, with natural armor that humans couldn't match. A simple test of defensive capability, Krull announced. Vex will attempt to restrain your security chief. No serious harm intended, of course. Officer Krell moved nervously at the edge of the circle. This is highly irregular. But within regulations, Krull interrupted. No weapons involved. Gray removed her formal jacket and handed it to Turner. Rules, she asked. Restrain your opponent. First to submit loses, Vex said, flashing sharp teeth in what might have been a smile. The crowd went silent as Gray nodded her acceptance. She stood relaxed, feet shoulder-width apart, hands open at her sides. Vex charged without warning, his powerful legs propelling him across the space between them. Gray didn't try to match his strength. Instead, she pivoted at the last second, using his momentum to guide him past her. As he stumbled, surprised, she swept his legs and used a precise strike to the back of his knee. The Drax fell hard. Before he could recover, Gray had twisted his arm behind him in a joint lock that worked on most bipedal species. Despite his superior strength, the angle nullified his advantage. Submit, she said quietly. Vex struggled for a moment, then slapped the floor with his free hand. I submit. The hall erupted in murmurs as Gray released him and stepped back. She offered her hand to help him up, a human gesture that confused the Drax but impressed the watching delegates. Krull's expression darkened. Interesting technique. Just basic training, Gray replied modestly. Harris stepped forward. Now that the entertainment is concluded, perhaps we can return to diplomatic matters. As the crowd dispersed, the human delegation noticed many delegates looking at them differently, with newfound curiosity, respect, and in some cases, concern. That wasn't just about testing us, Turner whispered. They were showing everyone we're vulnerable. Yes, Harris agreed, watching Krull's departing form. But it backfired. Gray straightened her jacket. For now. They'll try something else next. Jack Turner moved through the crowded common area, casually listening to conversations while appearing focused on his datapad. His job as diplomatic aide gave him the perfect cover for gathering intelligence. After Gray's demonstration yesterday, the station buzzed with talk about humans. Turner paused near a group of MREL delegates, small four-armed beings known for their impressive information networks. They didn't notice him as they continued their hushed conversation. Drax moving equipment to level 5, one whispered, not on the manifest. Security overrides in Section 12, another added. Krell authorized it personally. Turner's heart quickened, but his face remained neutral as he tapped notes into his pad. When he had enough, he made his way to a quiet corner and activated his secure comlink. Harris, we need to talk. Now. 20 minutes later, the human delegation gathered in Harris's quarters, which Miller had again swept for surveillance devices. Gray stood by the door as Turner laid out what he'd discovered. The Drax are positioning unmarked crates throughout the station, Turner explained, displaying a station map with marked locations. They've also installed something on level 5 that's drawing unusual power. And Krell is helping them? Harris asked, frowning. Or being manipulated, Miller suggested. The Dracs are known to use biochemical compounds that affect certain species' decision-making abilities. Gray studied the map. These positions give them control over major junctions, life support access, and, her eyes narrowed, all emergency escape routes. Classic siege preparation, Harris concluded. The question is, when? Ben Miller checked his data. The main peace talks start tomorrow. All delegation leaders will be in the Grand Chamber. Maximum impact. We need to alert the Council, Turner said. Harris shook his head. With what proof? And if Krell is compromised, who do we trust? We need more information. Gray straightened. I'll get it. The maintenance shafts should lead to level 5. Too risky, Harris objected. If you're caught. I won't be, Gray said with quiet confidence. Besides, we don't have time for anything else. After a moment's hesitation, Harris nodded. Take Miller. His technical expertise might be needed. As Gray and Miller prepared to leave, a soft knock came at the door. Turner checked the security feed and frowned. It's Officer Krell. The room went still. Harris signaled Gray and Miller to hide in the adjoining room, then nodded to Turner to open the door. Krell entered, his amphibious eyes scanning the room. Ambassador Harris, I apologize for the interruption. Not at all, Harris replied smoothly. How can I help you? There's been a change to tomorrow's security protocol, Krell said. All delegations must submit to additional scanning before entering the Grand Chamber. That seems prudent, Harris said. Any particular reason? Krell hesitated. Standard procedure. The scanners will be calibrated differently to detect certain biological signatures. After Krell left, Gray and Miller emerged from hiding. Biological signatures, Miller repeated. That's not standard. They're looking for something specific. Or someone specific, Gray said. Us. The Dracs learned something yesterday. The humans are more dangerous than they thought. Harris walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. They're changing their plan to account for us. Should we abort our reconnaissance? Turner asked. Harris turned back to the team. Decision made. No. We need information more than ever now. But Gray, Miller, be extremely careful. The stakes just got higher. Gray nodded, her expression determined. We're dealing with an enemy that underestimated us once. They won't make that mistake again. As Gray and Miller slipped out through a service panel Turner had identified earlier, Harris couldn't shake a growing sense of urgency. The diplomatic chess game was accelerating, and somewhere in the shadows, the Dracs were positioning their pieces for checkmate. The humans would need every advantage their unique evolution had given them to survive what was coming. Gray and Miller crawled through the narrow maintenance shaft of level 5. The metal walls pressed close around them, barely wide enough for their shoulders. Unlike most species in the galaxy, humans had evolved to handle tight spaces without panic, a useful trait now. Life sign detector shows 4 Dracs ahead, Miller whispered, checking the small device he'd modified from standard equipment. In the auxiliary control room. Gray nodded. Stay behind me. They reached a ventilation grate overlooking the control room. Through the slats, Gray could see 4 Drax warriors installing equipment on the station systems. The largest one was speaking. Lord Krull confirms the plan remains unchanged. When the gravity shifts, security forces will be disoriented. We take control of life support first, then communications. Gray and Miller exchanged alarmed glances. This was worse than they'd feared. We need to warn Harris, Miller whispered. As they backed away from the grate, Miller's detector suddenly flashed red. Movement behind us. Before they could react, the shaft opened beneath them. They fell 10 feet into a storage room and found themselves surrounded by armed Drac soldiers and Officer Krell. How predictable, Krell said, his amphibious face showing no emotion. Humans and their curiosity. Krell, Gray said, slowly standing. You're working with them. The security chief's wide mouth stretched in what might have been a smile. The Drax Empire rewards its allies. Earth refused their generous terms. Now you'll serve as an example. The lead Drax soldier stepped forward. Take them to holding. Lord Krull wants them alive. For now. Back in the diplomatic wing, Harris was growing concerned. Gray and Miller were an hour overdue. Turner paced nervously. Something's wrong, Turner said. They should have. The lights suddenly flickered. A moment later, the floor seemed to shift beneath them as the artificial gravity fluctuated. Emergency alarms began blaring throughout the station. Harris stumbled to the communication panel. Harris to station security. What's happening? No response came. Instead, the main screen in their quarters activated automatically. Lord Krull's scaled face filled the display. Attention all delegations. Nexus 7 is now under Drax control. Remain in your quarters. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. The human delegation will surrender immediately. The message repeated in several galactic languages. Harris turned to Turner and the remaining team members. It's starting. Gray and Miller must have been captured. What do we do? Asked one of the junior staffers, eyes wide with fear. Harris's expression hardened. We follow contingency plan Delta. Turner, get everyone moving. Turner nodded and began giving rapid instructions. The humans quickly gathered specific items from around their quarters, seemingly ordinary objects that could serve very different purposes. A loud bang shook their door as something heavy slammed against it. They're here, Turner warned. Harris moved to the center of the room, standing tall. Remember your training. We aren't soldiers, but we're still human. We evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every day. Our ancestors survived predators, disasters, and each other without fancy technology. The door crashed open. 6 Drax soldiers rushed in, weapons raised. Ambassador Harris, the lead soldier, growled. You will come with us. Harris raised his hand slowly. Of course. No need for violence. As the soldiers moved to secure him, Harris gave an almost imperceptible nod to Turner. In that moment, the lights in the room went out completely, cut by one of the human staffers who had reached the hidden panel. In the sudden darkness, chaos erupted. The Drax, despite their superior strength, found themselves fighting an enemy they couldn't see properly. Humans, with their exceptional night adaptation compared to most alien species, moved with practiced precision. When emergency lighting flickered on 30 seconds later, all 6 Drax soldiers lay unconscious on the floor, and the human delegation was gone. Throughout Nexus 7, the station's systems were falling under Drax control. But in the shadows, the humans were moving, adapting, preparing to fight back. The storage bay on Level 3 was dark and quiet when Harris and his team arrived. They had navigated through service tunnels and emergency shafts, avoiding Drax patrols with the station map Turner had memorized. Status report, Harris whispered as they regrouped behind tall storage containers. 6 of us here, Turner replied. No sign of Gray or Miller. Station communications are down, and gravity is fluctuating in sectors they want to control. Harris nodded grimly. Divide into teams. Turner, take Peters and locate the other delegations. Find out who's free and who's captured. Jones and Reed, I need you to get to the communications hub. See if you can restore emergency channels. What about you, sir? Asked Peters, a young diplomatic aide whose hands trembled slightly but whose eyes showed determination. I'm going after Gray and Miller, likely in detention level 4. Turner frowned. Alone? The Drax will have heavy guards there. Harris picked up a length of metal pipe they'd salvaged from a damaged wall panel. I won't be fighting directly if I can help it. Remember what Gray always says. Work smarter, not harder. Turner finished with a slight smile. They checked their makeshift equipment one last time. Without conventional weapons, they'd improvised. Belt buckles converted to lockpicks. Cleaning chemicals mixed to create smoke diversions. Station tablets reprogrammed to interfere with Drax communication frequencies. Move out in 2 minutes, Harris ordered. And remember, humans survived Earth because we adapted. Time to show the galaxy what that means. In detention level 4, Gray tested her restraints for the 3rd time. The energy cuffs holding her to the wall were designed for creatures much stronger than humans, which gave her a tiny bit of movement. Next to her, Miller worked on his own bindings. "Any luck?" she whispered. "Almost," Miller replied, his fingers working against the lock mechanism. "Their tech is advanced, but the principles are universal. I just need tow." The door slid open. Officer Krell entered with 2 Drax guards. "Comfortable?" Krell asked, his wide mouth forming what humans would recognize as a smirk. "5-star accommodations," Gray replied dryly. "Though the service is terrible." Krell moved closer. "Your species has a reputation for humor in dangerous situations. Fascinating, but pointless. Lord Krall wants information about Earth's defenses before we execute you publicly." "Bold plan," Gray said. "Taking hostage a station full of diplomatic delegations." "Not hostages," Krell corrected. "Witnesses. The galaxy will see what happens to those who defy the Drax Empire." A sudden alarm blared through the detention level. One of the guards checked his communication device. "Disturbance in Section 8, he reported. "Human detected." Krell's eyes narrowed. "Just one." "Reports are unclear," the guard admitted. "Security cameras in that section are malfunctioning." "Find them," Krell ordered. "I'll continue here." As the guards left, Gray caught Miller's eye and gave him a barely perceptible nod. Whatever was happening, they needed to be ready. Harris moved silently through the maintenance shaft above detention level 4. The station plans Turner had studied showed a vulnerable access point near Cell Block C. His time in Earth's Special Forces, years before becoming an ambassador, served him well now. Below him, he heard Drax guards running toward another section, drawn by the diversion he'd created using automated cleaning robots and a reprogrammed food delivery system. He reached the access point and carefully removed the panel. The cell corridor below was empty except for one guard outside what had to be Gray and Miller's cell. Harris took a deep breath, then dropped down behind the guard. The Drax turned, startled, but Harris had already swung the metal pipe, not at the guard's armored head, but at the unprotected knee joint Gray had demonstrated as vulnerable during yesterday's friendly contest. The guard collapsed with a grunt of pain. Before he could shout, Harris struck again, precisely at the base of the Drax's skull, another weakness Gray had identified. As the guard lost consciousness, Harris grabbed his access card and moved toward the cell door. He pressed the card against the reader and prepared himself for whatever was on the other side. The door slid open to reveal Gray in mid-action, her restraints broken, Krell unconscious on the floor, and Miller working on a control panel. Gray looked up, not entirely surprised. "You're late." Harris smiled briefly. "Traffic was terrible." "Status." "Miller's accessing the station security network," Gray explained, nodding toward the scientist. "If he can override Krell's codes, we can turn this around." Miller looked up from the panel, his eyes bright with excitement. "And I just found something better. The station's emergency protocols, the ones the Drax think they've disabled, they have a human-accessible backdoor." The main control room of Nexus 7 hummed with Drax activity. Lord Krall stood before the central command console, his scaled hands moving across alien interfaces with practiced ease. Holographic displays showed the station's status, most sectors under Drax control, delegates confined, and security systems compromised. "Status report," Krall demanded. A Drax lieutenant approached. "Most delegations are secured, my lord." The Mrel ambassador resisted and was executed as an example. "The human prisoners." He hesitated. Krall turned slowly. "Yes. They've escaped. Officer Krell is unresponsive. 3 patrol units have gone silent in the lower levels." Krall's eyes narrowed to yellow slits. "Find them." Now, and prepare the grand chamber for my address to the council. It's time the galaxy understood the new order. As the lieutenant hurried away, the station's lighting suddenly flickered. A moment later, the main screens changed color from Drax military red to standard blue. What is happening? Krull demanded. His technicians worked frantically at their stations. Someone is accessing emergency protocols, bypassing our overrides. The station's communication system crackled to life. Ambassador Harris's voice echoed through every level of Nexus 7. Attention all delegates and station personnel. This is Ambassador Harris of Earth. The Drax coup attempt is failing. All delegation members should proceed to emergency shelters immediately. Station security forces are being restored to command. Krull roared in frustration. Cut him off. Find the source. We can't locate it, a technician admitted. The signal is bouncing between multiple systems. Across the station, the situation was rapidly changing. In the security hub, Miller worked feverishly at the main controls, his fingers dancing across the interface while Gray and two freed security officers defended the doorway. Artificial gravity restored in all sectors, Miller announced. Communications network unlocked. And he smiled as he pressed a final command. Environmental systems under our control. In the diplomatic wing, Turner led a mixed group of aliens, representatives from a dozen worlds, through a hidden passage toward the emergency shelter. Many looked at the humans with new respect. Your species was prepared for this, said the Vorn ambassador, her large eyes blinking in amazement. Turner shrugged modestly. We're used to planning for worst-case scenarios. It's an Earth thing. In the main control room, Krull was growing desperate. The station was slipping from his grasp. He activated his personal communicator. All forces, converge on the Grand Chamber. Execute all prisoners. We still have the High Counselor. The doors to the control room suddenly hissed open. Lord Krull turned, expecting his reinforcements, but instead found Ambassador Harris standing alone, unarmed. This ends now, Krull, Harris said calmly. Krull laughed, a harsh, grating sound. One human against 6 Drax warriors. Your species truly is delusional. Harris stepped forward. We're not delusional. We're adaptive. Right now, Dr. Miller controls your life support. One command from me. And this room fills with a gas that affects Drax neurology specifically. Your scales won't protect you. You're bluffing, Krull snarled. Humans don't use biological weapons. It's not a weapon, Harris corrected. It's a medical sedative, designed for Drax patients, perfectly legal under council law. We just changed the delivery method. Krull hesitated, seeing the absolute certainty in Harris's eyes. And while we're talking, Harris continued, Officer Gray has freed the station's security forces. They're currently arresting your soldiers throughout Nexus 7. The other delegations are safe. A new voice came over the communication system. The High Counselor himself. Attention all station personnel. The coup attempt has failed. The Drax delegation is hereby stripped of diplomatic status. All Drax forces are ordered to surrender immediately. Krull looked around at his officers, seeing their resolve waver. With a roar of frustration, he lunged at Harris, claws extended. Harris didn't try to match the Drax's strength. Instead, he stepped aside, using Krull's momentum against him, exactly as Gray had demonstrated days earlier. As Krull stumbled past, Harris struck precisely at the nerve cluster at the base of the Drax's skull. Lord Krull collapsed, unconscious. 2 days later, the peace conference reconvened in the Grand Chamber. The Drax Empire's representatives were conspicuously absent, their seats filled instead by observers from their rival systems. The High Counselor addressed the assembly. Recent events have taught us much. Perhaps most importantly, we have learned that weapons take many forms, and true strength comes in many guises. He turned to the human delegation. Ambassador Harris, the Council extends its formal gratitude. Your people's actions saved not only this station, but perhaps the peace of the galaxy itself. Harris nodded in acknowledgement. Beside him, Gray sat with perfect posture, her eyes continually scanning the room, a habit evolved from ancestors who survived by watching for predators. As the new peace treaty was signed, many delegates looked at the humans differently than before. They had come to understand an important truth. In a galaxy of beings evolved for specific strengths, humans remained uniquely dangerous, not because of their technology or weapons, but because they themselves had been forged by a world that had tried and failed to kill them for millions of years. No weapons allowed. No problem. Humans are the weapons.